All right. Hello, everyone who is in early. Thank you so much for joining today. We'll get started in a few minutes here. I'm going to give time for people to get in and get settled. Hello, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or two, just waiting for people to get logged in. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone. We're going to give about one more minute here, just waiting for people to get on and get settled, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining. Alrighty. I'm going to get it kicked off here, and I'll hand it over to Justin and Dustin here in a second. But I just want to say a good afternoon and thanks, everyone, for joining us today for today's webinar, How to Build the Network of the Future, today with AHEAD and Cisco. My name is Caitlin, and I'm your host for today's webinar, and we'll kick things off with some housekeeping notes for you. We will be addressing all questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but would love for it to be as interactive as possible. So you can enter those into the Q&A widget or chat throughout. And then today's session will be recorded and will be available on demand to review or to send along to colleagues that couldn't make it after the live session. And then as a thank you for joining today live, we'll be providing an Uber Eats gift card after the event. But without further ado, I will pass things over to our head speakers for today's session, Justin Fermella, SVP of Software and Technology, and Dustin Germeisen, VP of Specialist Solutions and Engineering. It's the Justin and Dustin duo, but I will send it over to you guys. Thank you.
Easy to remember.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Caitlin. So I'll get started. The Justin-Dustin duo, and too many people call me Justin by accident. So
no one calls me Dustin. I'm sorry.
We're here to confuse you even further. So just a little more introduction on me, and I'll pass it over to Justin, then we'll get right into the content. So I lead our networking and security solutions engineering teams, and one of the main topics today will be around, building networks at scale and doing lifecycle refresh and how to tackle that complexity, both from just a technical capabilities perspective and with some of the other tooling that we have, one of them being Hatch, which we're going to talk about and also demo and show how it would apply to a large-scale Cisco or networking project. But before we do that, Justin, you want to do an intro on yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. So my name is Justin Fermella. I'm the SVP of Software and Technology here at AHEAD and also the founder of Hatch, a product. And again, this isn't not a product that we're selling here at AHEAD, something that we're showing off today is one of the values of working with AHEAD and one of the pieces of technology that we think is pretty interesting and makes a unique overall solution when it comes to delivering and building out a Cisco complex ecosystem.
Yep, thanks. So as I get into it here, we'll get into, networking and Hatch in particular as we go. But I think it will help to start and just kind of share what AHEAD's overall portfolio of capabilities looks like. So I represent the chunk of the pie there that says network platforms. I also represent our security program, which really kind of surrounds all the programs, and Justin leads the Hatch team. But I think the big thing here is that what we're trying to do for our clients is help with that end-to-end life cycle of any kind of technology, and we'll be talking about networking here in this particular example. But we're trying not to just resell solutions and walk away. We want to have that end destination in mind, and we're not afraid of the complex. We're not afraid of digging into the pieces and parts that integrate, and we're not afraid of digging into the logistics. And I think one of the things you'll see as we go through this presentation is that not only we're not afraid of tackling those complex things, but we're going to be fully transparent the entire time. One of the things you'll see from Hatch is full transparency in how you would interact with us as a partner. But all of these other things that you see on this wheel are benefits, that even if I'm out building a network, I'm taking into account the platforms that are going to run on it, the applications and workflows, cloud connectivity, and all of those other aspects. And I think it's really important when we talk specifically to networking to kind of understand how we're going to stitch all this together for customers. Diving into specifically the areas that I wanted to hit on today. So we'll cover network platforms and Hatch, but there's also a icon there on the left side of the circle that says Foundry. And I think it's important to kind of talk just for a moment about what Ahead's Foundry is. And what we have is we have the capability through a large manufacturing facility that we own and operate to do many different large-scale type deployments, from highly customized, custom hardware with custom software, to rack scale builds, or in my world in networking, doing things like IDF in a box, or pre-configuring SD-WAN and firewalls before they land at the end destinations. And I think even though we're talking more about the Hatch capability, I think it's important to understand how we might be able to do these sort of industrial scale deployments in the networking sense, because it all plays a part. And when Justin walks through some of the features of Hatch, you'll see places where if we were doing this in integrations, or if we were building sort of customized kit or customized SKUs, you would have visibility into those things that were done in the Foundry inside of Hatch. So it's important to know that this feature is here, and it's used very commonly on large scale networking deployments. And then, as I mentioned before, Hatch is, the way I like to describe it is, it's the window into the world of working with us. And so before we demo it, Justin, I just wanted you to kind of hit a little bit about, just what Hatch is as, a technology and some of the things that it brings to the customers.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. So Hatch is an interesting tool. It's a tool that's not, some people initially see it and they initially think, well, this is like an ITAM, or this is a CMDB. And what's interesting is it's not that at all. It's not at all designed to compete with ServiceNow, and not designed to compete with various different network automation tools. We look at Hatch as a aggregation and kind of high-level IT lifecycle management platform. What Hatch does is it leans on, and I'll show this in a minute, a bunch of integrations. It leans on connecting direct to things like manufacturers and various data sets, and pulls together information about your, information direct from Cisco, information from various devices that are in the field, pulls everything together and gives you one view that really helps you manage your network and your deployment in aggregate. Where is everything deployed? What is inbound? What is the renewals that are attached to those devices? And aggregates all that in one place. It is, what's interesting too is it's, again, not a piece of software that is a subscription based or charged by user. It's something that is part of the partnership with Ahead.
Yep. And I think that's really critical, because as I go into the next piece, which is sort of our differentiation in networking, I can hit on a few of the technology areas. We specialize a lot in network security and tying networking to security use cases. We have a very specialized public cloud networking team, which is critical as applications are migrating to the cloud, that both the external connectivity and the networking inside the cloud have constructs up to the standards that you would have had on premises. We're also doing a lot around network automation or network infrastructure as code. And then sort of a coming demand is, what does networking look like for AI? Not just for building the AI stack, but how do you redefine your edge networks to take into account things like data feeds and security as you build out more data analytics and AI? But the main focus of this conversation is really the top left here, which is around lifecycle management in the networking space. And I'll get into details about what that looks like with us. But to Justin's point, Hatch and Foundry are part of how we deliver lifecycle management, not a separate product that we sell to you or have subscriptions for, but that's just how we do large-scale lifecycle management here at Ahead. And I'll give you one example, not using the customer's name, but one of our largest consumers of this service is a large healthcare provider. And they are in the middle of a 5-year lifecycle refresh of all their clinical facilities, hospitals, clinics. We're talking about hundreds of clinics and dozens of hospitals across the United States that are all being assessed and evaluated for equipment that's at end of life cycle, or newer technologies, things like IoT, smart beds, et cetera, video that maybe can't be supported by the current infrastructure, and building out a roadmap for not only how to refresh them as a point in time moment, but how to begin a lifecycle program that says we tackle all of them based on a risk weighting right now, but we start to develop a program that tells us each year as we invest in lifecycle improvements of our environment, how do we then get the data that we need to determine the upcoming projects, but then how do we execute them? And from the execution standpoint, there's many things that we're deploying here. The network is one piece. My network team is doing SD-WAN, wireless, and switching in all the hospitals. There's also, if necessary, a lot of cabling work, a lot of AP realignment that happens. But there's also things like compute, if compute is necessary in the facilities or needs to be lifecycle, data protection. There's even parts of the project that we're migrating certain applications to the cloud. And we're doing this as an entire program. And for this particular customer, the aspects of the program that involve assets, hardware and software assets, are all recorded into Hatch. And so to give you an idea of how deploying, say, a single hospital might look like once you get past the assessment and sort of the design work that happens. But they're generally going to tackle maybe a hospital and its associated clinics, or maybe a region of hospitals within a particular market, all as part of one life cycle. And what will happen is there'll be a large purchase made, a bunch of Cisco gear and other things, compute and other devices that are purchased. They'll land in our Foundry facility. They'll all be tagged and asset tracked as inventory. Then we'll pull the assessment work that we did that determined, what needs to go into these sites. And I should mention too that the assets that are purchased all follow a standard. So when Justin's in the demo environment, he might be able to show you like IDF in a box as an example. This is a standard that was built for this particular customer of, which switch models do they have, which AP models do they have, which controllers do they invest in, and the software modules that they invest in. And of course, that's iterated over time as those things change in advance. But what happens when we initiate a deployment of a hospital is we go out and we determine how many of their standard IDF kits or whatever it may be that need to be deployed for that facility. We pull them out of inventory. There's some configuration that's done, some burn-in testing that's done, and firmware load that's done within Foundry. And then the devices are shipped kind of ready to plug and play when they get to the hospital. And all throughout that journey inside of Hatch, they're going to see core inventory as soon as it's ordered. They're going to see devices that are currently in implementation, and they're also going to see the shipping and logistics as they go to that end device. So you get almost a Amazon-like experience for enterprise equipment. We know generally down to the day of when this equipment is going to land at the appropriate facility. And so then our on-site hands teams that are doing things like cabling and swapping out of gear, everything is well timed out because it's planned ahead of time and it's all visible and transparent to both us and the client within Hatch. And so that just gives you an example of one type of a project that we might do. But speaking specifically to networking, there's a lot that we have to address in the networking world coming up. And typically these kind of networking lifecycle projects in the traditional enterprise have just been done almost on a device per device basis. I have 6,000 APs today. I need to refresh to the latest generation of 6,000 APs. And even that can be quite difficult, just the logistics of doing that many devices. But what we're being forced to tackle here is, this idea that the network is the highway. And so whether we're out building, AI applications or multi-cloud or putting IoT in an industrial environment, none of those innovations are possible without a network that's up to the task, both from a performance perspective, the number of devices that it can support, and also security. And so we're seeing a lot of environments now that want to do these transformation type projects that are actually hamstrung a little bit by the tech debt that exists in the network environment. And some of the things that we see as those challenges are, just networks that are very out of date, both from a logical architecture perspective or oftentimes even from outdated equipment. They're very complex, again, both in an architectural perspective and the number and types of devices that have to be addressed and the data available to us to understand that complexity. And then you get these transformation initiatives that come down the pipe, and they really compound both the need to modernize the network, but also the complexity of achieving it. So what we're trying to do with a lifecycle program is we want to essentially overcome the complexity of the current state. We want to help build standards and more repeatable type processes. And then we're going to utilize what we have with our Foundry, with our lifecycle program management, and of course, Hatch as a visibility tool to achieve these transformation objectives on a solid foundation with transparency end to end. And I skipped over one, Justin. I kind of wanted to go back too of maybe have you make a few comments too about when we're in these big lifecycle type projects, network or otherwise, but very commonly in networking, the different types of data sources that our customers are dealing with today.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're going to speak to is as we walk you through Hatch, all the data you see, every piece of data that we're showing, it exists out there. The problem you have today is it exists out there in a multitude of different places. You have everything from logging on to your partner's site, maybe emails with spreadsheets. Some might be scattered among your CMDB. Your CMDB might not even be up to date. We'll talk to you more about how we help and streamline that process. You might log directly into Cisco. You also have other parts of the product. I mean, this is what we're talking about Cisco today, but a deployment may include networking, it may include storage, it may include compute. So you have other vendors that you're having to pull data into and track. And really, when you look at it and you look at the amount of time and inconsistency and chaos and mistakes that come up when you're trying to balance just this, what I call mess of data, you're going to see how we help optimize and pull that together.
Yep. And so going back to this idea of sort of an end-to-end lifecycle project, let's talk about some of the things that might contribute to those data sources that you have to consider. One, there's just straight up the financials, right? The assets that are there, what, how much financial life do they have left on them? What does a refresh program look like? It's just understanding the economics of maintaining and refreshing the environment. There's also a lot of facilities work. I talked about enterprises that will do things like swap 1-for-1 the number of wireless access points, when in reality, and with the advancements that have been made, they need to do a complete rethink of wireless architecture and different coverage and different spectrums and things like that. So there's a lot of input that might come from, let's say, a facility assessment or a wireless assessment that needs to be taken into account. And that's just another data source that goes somewhere, right? It's probably going to go into a Word document or a PowerPoint that someone like ourselves might deliver. But that information is very critical to the overall lifecycle program and how things get refreshed. Then, of course, you have the procurement type things. When you buy a product from Cisco, the serial numbers of those devices, how they're configured, which modules are on them, which software entitlements do they have, what do their SmartNet contracts look like, or are they a part of an enterprise agreement? And then, of course, you have the physical aspects of things. Where is that asset physically located? And are you able to organize that into projects or associate it to customized templates, as I mentioned before, like IDF in a box? All of these are data points that happen throughout. And what Hatch is the window into that world. As you step through this kind of a process with us, the Hatch is going to be your ability to see all of these data sources and how they tie all together. And Foundry, of course, comes into play mainly for the staging and implementation aspects, but Foundry is a data source for Hatch as well. So if we do something in the Foundry, let's say we applied firmware or we did a certain burn-in test on a particular device, Hatch will also see that information. So you can understand what has happened to the device during implementation, not just the end state that it was in. And we use ServiceNow on this particular slide as more of an example. It's probably the most common one, but Hatch, everything in Hatch is API driven, and we have many customers that will consume Hatch information either natively in the portal that Justin's going to show, or sometimes piping that information out to a ServiceNow-like tool so that we have things like our staging and our Foundry information about a device, or maybe we have asset information going back to the manufacturer like Cisco that needs to be included in the CMDB. So it's important to note that everything from Hatch can be consumed in the portal as we're going to show it to you today, or it can also be piped out to integrations. And those integrations, in many cases, go both directions, right? So Hatch can receive information from a lot of different sources. And what we've built behind it is what we call the ahead data layer. And so some of the things Justin's going to show you is just how we visualize inside Hatch the things that are in this data layer. And in one in particular, over on the manufacturing side, we have some of the deepest inbound integrations with Cisco as a partner of ours. But before I move on to that, Justin, what did you want to add here?
This is kind of the magic of it. We're going to show you, and I know we've been talking about it a lot, and it's like, let's just see it, and we're going to show you in a second. But really what we're going to show you is a SaaS-based product, but the SaaS-based product is just the best way for us to kind of demonstrate what it does. And what we're describing here is this data layer, and this data layer can drive, for example, we have integrations in the ServiceNow where assets can be pushed right into the CMDB, renewal data pushed right into the CMDB, integrations into procurement systems. We have open APIs. We have different reporting options. When you look at it this way, it's more of a tool that is designed for automation. It's designed for orchestration. When we work with clients like Netflix, they almost interact with us purely through a programmatic way. They're using the applications that they're used to using every single day. They're using these hooks, they're integrating into our data layer. They're using the integrations we already have to basically automate the deployment, automate the management, automate the management of renewals, the management of inventory, all of the things I'm going to show you. All of that can be done behind the scenes. All of that can be done through triggers, through various third-party applications, and triggered into the application itself.
Yep. And Justin, I have to piggyback off of you. Just show me already with one more slide. So I just wanted to kind of double click specifically on Cisco. And again, Justin's going to show a lot of this stuff inside the demo. But I think this might help provide a little context to one, we have a deeper integration with Cisco than most of the other integrations, maybe all of the integrations that you saw on that prior slide. So when you procure a piece of Cisco equipment, we gather information as soon as we have it, from serial numbers to support contracts. We even pull in things like if Cisco puts P-certs out on a particular device, it's another data source. We might as well pull it into Hatch, not to replace your vulnerability management program, but it's data that we're pulling in from native integration with Cisco. We might as well put it in there. But going back to my examples of like large scale lifecycle type refresh, I think the really important thing is that we pull in all of Cisco's lifecycle information. And that's not just the age of the environment or when support runs out, but when Cisco puts out things like end of sale dates or end of support patching dates, and of course, complete end of life dates, we'll be able to see that in Hatch, and we'll also be able to see reports that tell us when do we have Cisco devices that are coming up on some of those moments. And it can help you make decisions around, where do we refresh and when. It's not the be all end all of that information, but it's another source. And the last thing, kind of a plug for my networking team, is a lot of the things that we're doing out for clients, assessing their network, looking at technical, logical architecture, and of course, assessing the non-Cisco aspects of their network or devices that are on the network. We're also able to pipe those in via API to add context to the environment. So you take the Cisco information, you take things that we might do from, let's say, an assessment. We also can hook into other tools like a NetBrain, for an example, or a Autobot from a configuration management, or even just straight up spreadsheets if we have them from some tools. And again, correlate all that information, get it into Hatch, and get it in there alongside of what we're natively pulling from Cisco. So I just think it's, as you go through this here, Justin, like, we want to make sure that everyone understands that the data model that's behind this is really the key. And what we're trying to do is correlate as much as possible and provide as much transparency as possible about the environment. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Justin, to open up Hatch and kind of start clicking through.
Thank you, Justin. All right. With all that said, now let's actually talk and view it and go through it. So there's three primary pillars of Hatch that I'm going to walk through today. First pillar is program management. Program management is going to be everything from projects to the sites equipment's deployed at, the productization and bundles that Dustin talked about. The next pillar is going to be procurement. This is where we get more into our bread and butter. This is where's my stuff, logistics details, inventory details. And then we get into the asset management, and this goes deeper into the assets themselves, the details, the life cycle, the support contracts, and so on. So starting off, now there's certain sections where, everyone's seen project management software, and I don't want to perseverate and go too deep into that. So what I really want to point out, though, is there's this concept of dimensions in Hatch, and this is one of many dimensions. What we're doing is when there's let's say a big refresh or a big rollout, we're grouping all the activity into kind of a project record. And what we're saying is, here's all of the order activity, here's all the related assets, here's all of the related shipments, all in one place. We do something very similar when it comes down to sites. Here's where we'll have every site that you have that we're either deploying to or Cisco's deployed to, have it registered here. And what's cool about this is we have our data sets of what equipment we've shipped out to different sites for you, as well as pulling data direct from Cisco on any equipment that might have already been deployed. We can pull that data into, and we can show by site. Let me pick a site here and drill right in. And we can see, again, what's all the order and spend activity that we've had for this site. What are all the assets that have been deployed to this site? What are all these shipments or logistics details we've had for this site? What are all the support contracts that we have outstanding that are specific to this one deployment and site? And then we have everything down to even if there's various attachments for, let's say, an engagement we've done, services we've done out in the field. Here's a network site heat map, a site assessment. as well as if there's any individual users at that site itself that we need to, let's say we need to centralize communication, and you say, hey, look, anything that's being shipped to this data center, I just need to go ahead and make sure that Dwight and Jim here can log in or be emailed and know the activity or know the details just on the equipment that is specific to that deployment. I don't want them to go in or necessarily be part of the communication that's going to a data center that's maybe in Europe or to another retail site or edge site deployment. We can kind of set that up as well here. So this becomes really cool. And the other thing that's cool about this is that these sites here can match up, and let's say you're using ServiceNow. These will map directly to locations and stockrooms in ServiceNow. So when these records are pushed and updated in ServiceNow, they're updated to and put right into that stockroom location in your ServiceNow instance. And that's not like details, or that's not work you have to do to go ahead and set that up during the receiving process. As soon as we know the equipment is shipped and was delivered, we'll mark it as available to use in that specific stockroom in ServiceNow. And you can see here how we match up even the ID of those sites to those third-party systems. Another area Dustin touched on, which is kind of neat, is our ability to kind of productize and wrap up a repeatable deployment in the platform. Here's an example. Let's say we're doing a big multi-campus refresh, and there's maybe 100 different campuses that are having a refresh done at. We can set up a record and say, this is what this deployment roughly looks at. There might be a couple different variations of it that can be managed in this, but it includes these components. It includes this potential software licensing maintenance, and roll that up, create a bill of materials. And then what's really neat is we can kind of do change control tracking. So I can see we're on revision 2.0. And if you remember back to the site segment when I was looking at that, some of these sites have a version attached to them. What we can really do here is we can say, hey, we're doing a big refresh, and all of these sites are on version 1.0. Now we're going through and we're changing this wireless access point from X to Y, and we're going to rev that. We're either going to say that's 1.5 or that's a 2.0. And now we're going to go ahead and use concepts such as change control, approval processes that'll have team members from our side, from your side, who will sign off on that change, potentially discuss the details of that change. And what we'll do is make sure that before this switch from A to B is pushed out there into the field, that your team has signed off on it, and then that we're tracking that. And then going forward, we can know that, hey, look, these 50 campuses are on revision 2, and these 50 campuses are on version 1.5 or 1.0. And that helps guide your future strategy. Yes, Dustin, jump in.
And just let me add here too. So this particular example, IDF site in a box, I mean, Justin's in our demo environment now, but this was pulled exactly from the healthcare customer that I was listing before. And this is really important when you build a program like what they've done, which is they want to build LCM or lifecycle management as a continuous program, right, that they invest in every year. And there's a lot of decision criteria that goes into the different pieces of their environment that they're going to refresh or tackle in a given year. So that there'll be a budget that is set, but which sites and which pieces of those sites get targeted. Now, of course, there's things like performance issues and things like that, or maybe new workloads that need to be supported. Those go very high in the priority range. But when you get down into the assets themselves, there's the obvious things like if Cisco is end of lifing a particular piece of hardware, we need to at least consider what to do about it. Or if there's maybe a software renewal or a maintenance renewal coming up, there's some decisions there. But in this particular case, the versioning of the entire stack is an increasingly critical element, right? And so you'll notice here in this example where he went from one version to another, it was just an AP change. But the customer can say, like, I have version 1.0 of this environment, and only thing that is life cycling out of that is this 9120 access point. Well, now I can start to look at life cycling of this environment as just an upgrade to the latest version of our IDF in a box versus tackling a large scale refresh. So I just want to kind of put in the context of when you utilize the custom product bundle type SKUs and you organize those into their own life cycle, it provides another angle to look at how you life cycle equipment or how you life cycle entire environments. It can be looked at as more of continuous progression versus rip and replace.
Thank you, Dustin. Additionally, with this, when we go ahead and kit and bundle, we can actually stage using, so Dustin touched on Foundry. And I know it's kind of confusing. We have these multiple concepts. We have Hatch, which is the software. We have Foundry, which is our integration center and depot capabilities. But these things play together quite well in that here I can say, here's the two variations of this campus rollout. And I can even drill in, I can even see and understand what inventory is being held in stock for these different variations and what we have ready to go to basically help, line up the timing of technicians and other resources as refreshes or new campuses or new sites are coming online, and have an understanding of how those kind of things play together. Moving on to the procurement pillar, here's where we get into more of the day-to-day, where is my stuff, understanding of when something has been put in the stock, when something has been deployed, when it has arrived at the site that it needs to arrive at. Here I can see in one place all my activity. I can drill into an example here where we're shipping to a retail store. Looks like some Nexus switches. I can see everything down to exactly when it's planned to ship, understanding what site it's going to be associated to, if it was part of a given project, custom fields. This is going through one of our integration centers and having these switches pre-configured before deployment. In that case, I can even drill in and I can understand where in that process these switches are. I can drill in and I can even go so far, and it gets a little very detailed, and even understanding who are the individuals who are part of that configuration process in that integration center. All of that audit trail is tracked. And then I can scroll down here and see, here's what's being deployed. I can even see, yes, we have this network switch, but I want to know more about the configuration of those switches deployed. And here I can see a breakout of the full details of what that looks like. Now, going a step further beyond the orders are in play, more so, okay, this action is done. It's left Cisco. It's left one of our facilities. Now, where is it? Now I have one place in which I can see all of the logistics and shipment details for anything that's going on in one consolidated dashboard. And yes, in many cases today, what you'll have is you'll get tracking numbers from a provider. You'll just have something emailed to you. This brings that all into one place. This is integrations into over 1,160 different logistics partners. And I can see live the shipping details. Where is it? This is in transit. Where is it right now? What's the exact step? And even more so, which is neat, is if something goes wrong, I can see here something was rejected or refused. Our system will open up an exception. Our system will open up a ticket, and it'll assign that ticket to one of the team members on our side. This is critical. And, there was a great story, had a partner, big communications partner. There was a large data center project going on. There was a bunch of equipment on a pallet shipped via truck to that data center. And they had technicians scheduled for that night. And for whatever reason, the carrier who was shipping it put it into a small van. This was a data center with a submerged dock. They couldn't unload it. At 10 a.m. in the morning, they refused that shipment. As that happened, our system opens up an exception, assigns it to a team member on our side. That team member then reaches out to that carrier. By 3:30 that afternoon, the equipment had been put in on a proper truck, had been unloaded at that data center, and the work that was scheduled to happen that night still was able to happen. There wasn't a loss of 24 or 48 hours wondering where something was, wondering why it didn't get there. This has eyes on all that kind of activity. And it goes a little too wonky with getting into even all the analytics and details of those kind of activities I just talked about. Next thing it tracks is it tracks inventory. We have the capability on a global basis to house pre-deployment stock in any of our depots. And we can give you real-time details of what's in stock, what's ready to deploy, set up reorder points. We can even have incoming inventory to those depots, because typically projects aren't just one thing. There might be various components that are going forward that need to be kitted together for a deployment to a site before somebody in the field receives that equipment and then rolls it out. This can take, and we can have notify us of other equipment that's being sent to that depot that's bound to be kitted with that deployment, all managed in one centralized dashboard. Everything's skewed up, and you have visibility into all of those SKUs and what's being held where.
Yeah, and Justin, maybe I'll add another anecdotal experience. There was a particular customer that we were doing a large-scale deployment across many different locations, and the standard in their environment was switches with 2 10 gig modules, and there was just a mistake in the shipping where of the first inventory load, where the switches ended up with only one module, and it was something that can be corrected. It's a restock from between us and Cisco and bring it in. But if we were dependent on that all arriving exactly correctly at the end state, that would have delayed that project pretty significantly. In this particular case, because it was going into inventory in our facility, we were able to pull modules out of other switches to complete switches and begin the project. And that's not something that you always want to do, but that just gives you an idea of the flexibility that you can pivot if you're using not only the inventory services from Foundry, but you have this information at your fingertips. We were able to determine all the components and subcomponents that we did have in stock to build out a plan such that we can start on certain locations. And honestly, by the time we got to depleting the stock that was there, we had already backfilled the incorrect inventory. So this can really come into play a lot, this inventory aspect, on very large scale projects where you do a bulk order with Cisco, but it's going to take time to roll it out. And having all those components in your inventory and seeing as you're pulling things out of inventory and doing the configuration is really valuable information in those projects.
It goes a step further where we have full global reach, global export management controls. We have a full global knowledge base here that gets into if we're going to be deploying, let's say, something to the United Kingdom, going in, having an understanding of even time in transit. What's the national power infrastructure of that country? What are the requirements required for us to export or import goods into that country, down to the certifications that are required on the equipment to go into that country. So there's just an entire system to manage our ability to get equipment anywhere it needs to go. Lastly, moving on to the assets pillar. Here's where we get into the details of everything that you have under your umbrella of your Cisco assets, plus any other, as you see in my example, Dell NetApp. I know this isn't a storage or compute webinar, but typically these deployments have components from a variety of different sources, and all of that can be managed in one place. Drilling into one of these assets. Now here's an asset that did go through one of our integration centers. So we see configuration data as it was set up before deployment. In this case, we do see a hardware snapshot as the system went through a validation piece of software that pulled all the details of the hardware. We can pull and see any of the automation or actions that were run pre-deployment, as well as get into, and this is really neat, what we're going to see across all of our assets. We're going to see the live entitlement data pulled here from Cisco. I can see that this equipment has SmartNet total carry 8x5. I can see the contract that it's under, and I can see when the expiration date is. Here's where this gets really neat, is all this information is pulled together in aggregate. I can see across all of my devices, and we have API integrations into all these various partners, and it'll pull for those vendors, when are the upcoming renewals? What are the entitlements? What do I have that's covered? When is that coverage expiring? I can understand if something's under a contract, let's say a given SmartNet contract. For this contract, what are the lines? What are the individual things covered under it? When is that renewal approaching? And just have a single pane of glass to have comprehension on the major milestones that need to be acted upon into the future across your entire IT estate. Jumping back into the asset, you go to the Cisco asset because there's some things I missed here, is beyond the entitlements. It's pulling other things, and this, you can see here, Cisco provides what vulnerabilities are on the device. We can see what software updates are available. We can see, and this is really important, pulling the lifecycle milestones. So understanding for this catalyst, when is the end of life date, when is the last date of support, into vulnerability support, all brought into one place. And then getting an idea of what was the last seen software version on the device. This could either be as it was purchased, or it could be if there's a CX Cloud or another set of integrations going on, pulling that all together in one single repository. Lastly is, while we have the individual assets themselves, let's say these assets are part of a larger installation. Here I can see a case where I have a full rack, and I can even see details on the full rack elevation. You can understand where the Cisco switches were put in that rack elevation, front or back of rack. I can see details of what else was in that, and just get a full idea of an as deployed, as we delivered the full rack and stack solution, what did that look like before it was pushed out to your environment. Before I kind of end here, a couple last things I wanted to touch on. I know we're done with assets, but platform itself, yes, has integrations into the variety of different security systems. The really cool thing I mentioned, and I can't talk enough about, is the ServiceNow integration. Today, when purchasing new physical assets into your environment, there's this blind spot. And the blind spot is issue a PO to the provider, something is in transit, something arrives to a specific site, and it's not until it's either picked up by a discovery or someone goes through and actually adds the asset itself to the CMDB, to the ITAM system. What this does is, at the point of departure, when a piece of equipment leaves Cisco, when it leaves one of our facilities, at that point, we add the record into your CMDB. We push all the details we know about the record into the CMDB. Any of the entitlement, the maintenance, support contracts also pushed along with that. And then once that arrives, we will go ahead, because we're tracking that shipment, and update that status. And now it is in your system, ready to go, ready to be managed. The other cool thing is, when it comes time for renewal, if you go ahead and update the status of that asset to retired, to pulled out of service, that can update back to Hatch. And when we go through, and you saw that renewal dashboard, we'll pull out of the renewal dashboard assets that are no longer in service that you've marked. So there's also a real cost savings here in helping you drive down the cost of accidentally, inadvertently renewing equipment that is no longer actually in process. And the other thing too is, this helps make sure assets are utilized in a timely fashion. I've had clients who have had equipment sitting on a pallet in a data center for months at a time, because the handoff between procurement and OT, operational technology, to actually get the equipment deployed, something fell through there. No one knew about the fact that the equipment was sitting waiting to be deployed. This kind of removes that blind spot. This can trigger this can open a ticket. This can trigger the processes in ServiceNow to make sure that equipment is put in, and it kind of continues on into its journey to make sure you're getting the maximum amount of utilization possible. Additionally, there's integrations into full documented REST, GraphQL APIs. I mean, and it goes so far as to, even if you were to go into the Microsoft App Source, we go so far as to even have integrations into things like Excel, where we go ahead and even add a little import data button to the top, where you can pull data directly from Hatch real time to just run things out of the spreadsheets that you use on a daily basis and have that data right up to date. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Dustin. That covers the majority of our demo.
All right, I will pop back one screen, but we will go, Caitlin, into the Q&A here in a second. But just kind of wrapping up, what Hatch does for you, right? All those aspects that Justin talked about, from managing programs, managing how you procure and track procurement and logistics around your assets, how you manage them once they land in production, and life cycle around them, and then how you tie that into other systems that you have. And then from my perspective, as the network guy, it's being able to help my customers and my own deployment teams deal with the complexity of these large scale networking type refreshes that we all know can be very challenging, just from understanding the assets that are there and, of course, the technical aspects. So Hatch is, again, it's our transparent window into this world. It's not a product that we're selling to you. It's a point of engagement when you're doing a project with us or procuring through us. So with that, I'll pass it over, Caitlin, to hopefully we've got some questions out there.
Yeah, looks like we have a few to get started, but just a reminder, if you have any, make sure you either submit them into the chat or the Q&A widget, and we'll try to answer all of them here at the end with about 10 minutes left. But the first one, and Justin, you may have touched on this when you were talking about cost savings at the end, but someone submitted, I already have ServiceNow CMDB storing all of my asset information. Do I get any additional value from having Hatch?
So the additional value is, first, the question is always, how is that information getting into the CMDB, and how complete is that information when you first procure the items? One of the benefits is you're going to get more timely information, and you're going to get more information such as, and I would ask, are you tracking things like the renewal, the maintenance, and the support that's associated to those assets? Is that being tracked right now? And is someone having to manually update that data? That's it. What we can do is automate that process. The other benefit there is, when it comes time for renewal, by these two systems working in concert, we can help you track and save money and run through the audit of what actually needs that renewal to make that quoting and renewal process a lot more straightforward.
Cool. Then have someone wanting to know a little bit more about the Hatch roadmap and features or integrations that we're looking to add to the platform.
So our biggest focus with Hatch is to make it clear what you need to worry about and when you need to worry about it. And when you look at what we're working on in the lab, it's to make it a lot clearer what that timeline for the next 12 months, next 24 months looks like, to aggregate and bring together. Look, you have in Q2 of next year, you have this many devices that are coming up as end of support, or there's end of vulnerability support from Cisco. And you have this many devices that are going to have to be reviewed for maintenance, or maybe we have a major EA renewal that's going to cover this. The whole idea is to make it incredibly clear for you to plan efficiently, for you to budget efficiently, and have that rolled out in a nice, clean, and orderly interface within Hatch. That's one of our major focus points. So you'll see a lot of focus on expansion on the kind of lifecycle data. And not only that, but taking it a step further and recommending what are the different courses of action and what are the next steps you should be taking.
Yeah, and I'll add too, from a networking perspective, Justin, hopefully I'm not revealing too much roadmap here, but one of the things Justin and I have talked about a lot is, okay, we have the asset information, we understand the life cycle, we understand the entitlements that are associated to it, but is it actually in use, right? Yeah. And today, Hatch is not a tool that's polling your environment and getting, live real-time information. And I don't think we ever want to try to replace tools like that. Cisco makes a lot of great tools for monitoring and getting telemetry from your environment. But what we want to do is we want to hook into those types of tools, or maybe a third-party type of tool, to at least understand running state. Because one of the things that happens often is you'll get this data in front of you that says, okay, you have all this equipment life cycling, or you have an enterprise agreement that's coming due. But are all the components that you're looking at potentially renewing there, are they actually in use and transmitting data? It's a really important data point. And I know that Justin and team are kind of working on different aspects to incorporate. And it's probably going to end up being like a third-party integration to native Cisco systems, and then maybe third-party tools like a NetBrain or something like that.
But Dustin's absolutely right. Again, to give you on those actionable events, to know, okay, now that we're going to go through and do this, out of this whole population that qualifies for this upcoming renewal, when were these last seen? How many of them are operational? what does that data look like? So we can get a better assessment of, I have a high degree of confidence on 70% of these assets, 20%, we know X, and 10% we're going to have to do some additional diligence because they haven't checked in or they haven't been seen, and we have a gap there.
Great, thanks. We'll go over to the one that was just submitted in the chat here, but is this able to track leased assets?
Yes, the one thing we do is when we look at leases, I look at them very similar to how we look at a support or maintenance or software licensing contract. And what we do is we track the lease as another entitlement. Now, I know we didn't show it in the demo, but the idea is that lease is a specific term, and that asset is going to have a compelling event in the future of when that lease is up for either a review or whatever that is. That would be tracked just like another renewal in our system.
Yeah, I would also say too, Justin, and we don't really have time to demo it here, but there's a FinOps aspect of Hatch where we're via integrations. If we've done some financial analysis around the assets, we can pull that information in as well. So, not just like the things that come directly from lease or directly from the manufacturer, but if there's other aspects or correlations that we've done on the financial side, we are also working on pulling that into view.
And Dustin's absolutely right. We completely moved over in the demo, but didn't touch on some of the advanced FinOps capabilities we have. We'd love to get into that in a different conversation.
Great. Well, that is the last question I have here, unless someone wants to type one in really quick. But thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We will be providing the recording in the follow-up as well as some of a few assets and related content. And then we will also be sending out the Uber Eats gift cards within the next 24 hours. Be on the lookout for parts 2 and 3 of our series here with ServiceNow and Dell coming early 2025. I just want to say thank you to our sponsor, Cisco, for this webinar. And then thank you again for joining us. I know your schedules are busy, and we appreciate you taking the time out to join. So thanks, Dustin and Justin, and we'll see you for the next one.
Thank you, Caitlin, for organizing.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, guys. See ya.